They say repeating something over and over, expecting a different result, is the mark of insanity. Well, Grady Hendrix has finally driven me insane. Merry meet, my fellow bookish witches. Welcome to Witchy Reads, a place where we talk about books and other bookish things. I'm here again. Why am I here again? It's because I thought this time would be different. I naively thought this book would be good, that Hendrix might have learned something and grown as an author. I was wrong. Not only does Hendrix appear to not have learned anything, I feel like he might be getting worse. In that he seems to be becoming more blatant in his disdain for women and uses stories revolving around the woman experience to express those feelings. Which makes me stop and wonder why. Why does he continue to write about and for this demographic? It's starting to feel like he set himself up as this male author who made a certain reader base believe he was a supporter of women, only to now begin to drop that facade. Now, he has written a book that explicitly focuses on some of the most women-centric themes and manages to twist them into some of the most disgusting displays of patriarchal bullshit I have ever had the misfortune to read.
Why don't you tell me how you really feel?
I went into this reading experience with a clear mind and worked hard to ignore all my biases. The hope being that it would be a better experience than I've had with this author previously. Having read his most recent book, I don't think I can ever pick up anything by this man ever again. My disdain for this author has now hit critical mass. For 6 months, she'd been holding on by her fingernails, but at least she'd been around people who knew she could tell a joke and made straight A's in English and loved Patty Duke. Now, she was surrounded by strangers who only knew one thing about her. She'd been stupid enough to get pregnant. Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix follows the semi-true experience of women and young girls in the 1970s who, after becoming pregnant, are sent away to what are known as maternity houses to give birth, give up their baby, and then return to their life as if nothing has happened.
So women didn't even get to grieve. They just simply, went away. In the beginning, it's a kind of crisis. By the end, they're mothers.
This, of course, taking place before the 1973 ruling of Roe versus Wade. We follow the point of view of the woman main character, Neva, a 15-year-old girl who fell for the wrong teenage boy and now finds herself abandoned by her religious zealot father at a maternity house called Wellwood Home in St. Augustine, Florida, in the summer of 1970. She didn't think things could get any worse. Then she saw the sign, "Welcome to Florida." The first thing that happens when Neva arrives at Wellwood Home is being stripped of her identity by forcing her to change her name for the duration of her stay. She now goes by the name Fern. This is just the start of the women and girl characters losing their autonomy, which is the true horror of this story. Outside of Fern, there are the other girls that are staying at Wellwood Home. There's Rose, the eldest of the girls, who is adamant about keeping her daughter, and nothing and no one will prevent that. She also has moments where she acts semi-maternal to the other younger girls at the home. There is Zinnia, who is around Fern's age, and despite being willing to give up her child, is convinced that she will still marry her child's father. She is also written in such a way that makes her more separate from the other girls, which is a choice considering she is one of the two main characters characters of color we get to know throughout the story. Then there is Holly, an abused, malnourished, mute, barely 14-year-old girl who takes a liking to Fern, mainly for comfort. Miss Wellwood is the owner and overseer of Wellwood Home, which she inherited from her father, who was one of those red flag men who wished he had had a boy. This character has daddy issues. Feels like this is meant to make us feel bad for her. It doesn't work. You are here because you acted like a barnyard animal. I have been called to protect you during this time of your flowering. She is not a good person. No one who works at Wellwood Home is a good person. I had hoped with the direction this book takes that there would be at least one person, but nope. Everyone sucks here. From the doctor and nurse who have zero empathy for any of the girls or their situation, to the social worker who grifts being on the girls' side only to portray them every single time they come to her for help. The point of Wellwood Home and the adults who have entrapped these pregnant young women and girls there is to rip babies from their mothers while brainwashing the young girls to believe this is what God and proper society want for them. That despite their mistake, they can still have a chance at a normal life if they simply follow the instructions without argument or complaint.
They let me hold her, and I looked at her and I told her, I have to do what I'm told. I love you and I don't want to do this.
Happiness isn't about doing what you like, but learning to like what you have to do. Miss Wellwood incorporates a lot of messed up tactics to get the girls to comply with the rules of Wellwood Home, including and not limited to creating a fake girl named Ivy who apparently chose to keep her baby, and her life was destroyed because of that choice. I heard from Ivy again, Diane would say, holding up a letter. I'd like to tell you things have gotten easier for her, but life isn't easy for a single woman with an illegitimate child. It's a lot, and none of the character interactions have anything positive going for them. Fern is annoying and refuses to try and connect with any of the other girls, almost as if she feels she is above them all. This is particularly clear in her interactions with Rose, who, while rough around the edges, which is fair considering her situation, has been nothing but cordial to Fern. Yet Fern treats her like a nuisance. Any friendships that develop between the girls are clearly created due to forced proximity, which lessens a lot of the later attempts at emotional impact between the women and girls, which is so frustrating. Hendrix seems to want praise for writing these shallow women friendships without putting forth any emotional work, and still expects readers to have an emotional response to these shallow friendships.
You're not my friend anymore. What did I say?
Much like how women are always meant to carry the emotional load in any relationship, and men are left confused because the divorce came out of nowhere. It's weak storytelling, an affront to women's friendships, and enforces this notion that women are all the same, which is just inherently not true. It's disgraceful that this is something he does in all of his books, at least all the ones I've read. The first shift of the story comes when the girls agree to all take books from the mobile library that comes every week, so that they have a variety of books to keep the boredom at bay. The only two who really care about having multiple books to read are Fern and Zinnia. Holly can't read, and it's implied that while Rose can read, she doesn't really like to read. This is when we are introduced to the librarian, the mysterious Miss Parse, who recommends an occult book to Fern. She pushes Fern to read the book, in the process find her coven so as to tap into her power as a woman. Knowledge is a kind of power, and the knowledge you find in this book will help you find power inside yourself. Power is not a material possession that can be given. Power is the ability to act, and that must always be taken, for no one will ever give that power to you. Those who have power wish to keep it, and those who want power must learn to take it. I was so excited when the librarian appeared, because I foolishly thought that we were finally going to get not only some women empowerment in this dark violence against women narrative, but we were also going to see women supporting women. I should not have trusted this man.
Oh, you're a liar. You're just a liar. You always were.
To understand why, as a woman, I have what appears to be this one-sided beef with Hendrix, we should discuss some of the themes he employs in his stories. At least the ones I've read. And the ones I've read are the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, the Final Girls Support Group, and now Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. The major theme he employs in all of these stories is the role of girls and women within the scope of patriarchal control. This theme is meant to explore the societal norms and power structures that have historically favored men over women, which ultimately leads to unequal gender roles, expectations, and opportunities. This is where you can tell he pulls a lot of his horror elements from, and that's not a bad place to be pulling these horror elements from at all. Women bodily horror is definitely a thing that you can tap into as an author. Because yes, as a woman looking at the world through this lens can be terrifying. This kind of premise has so much potential, especially as a horror story. Every time Hendrix ruins it with his subtle misogyny, twisting the story to portray his woman characters as catty, mean, and not worth rooting for, is infuriating. In Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, this theme is demonstrated primarily through rigid gender roles, unequal power dynamics, and the objectification and sexualization of the women and girl characters. It is particularly worse in this book due to the fact that most of the girl characters are minors. The rigid gender roles are seen through the shame and guilt pushed onto these girls who are victims of a situation that they either wanted no part of or were too naive to understand and are now taking the brunt of the responsibility when conception that leads to pregnancy always takes two people. We see the unequal power dynamics displayed through these characters by having the girls carry the full responsibility of their pregnancies while their male counterparts get to remain untainted.
What are you talking about? What about what's fair to me?
We also see this power play out with the interactions between the girls and their male doctor, who treats every last one as incompetent and lacking the maturity and knowledge to know their own bodies. And while there are many instances of objectification and sexualization in this book, I want to focus on the character of Holly, because it is with her that we see the most clear and disturbing use of patriarchal control. Holly is barely 14, and we eventually learn that her pregnancy is due to a series of repeated SAs and statutory rape done by her church's pastor. Once we learn this, Holly's character description takes on a whole new meaning. It is gross, and the entire plot surrounding this character made me want to rage.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Hendrix decided to make this the main conflict of the plot and handled it in such a disgraceful way that I was flabbergasted that this man and his fans think he is the voice for the women's experience in the horror genre. We don't get to have nice things. So this cis white man gets to be that voice for women? Okay. Other themes within Hendrix's books that I want to touch on are the trauma of women and religious extremism. Trauma has always been a significant theme in literature surrounding women, especially in horror. If done well, it can present a challenge to traditional narratives and promote understanding and empathy through the horrors that women face. It is usually through exploring these experiences that authors can expose the hidden and, more often than not, silenced traumas of women. The ultimate goal being, hopefully, to prompt social change and offer new perspectives on gender and identity. To its credit, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls sort of starts out that way if you ignore all the red flags. I wanted to give this book the benefit of the doubt. When the witches appeared, I thought we were going to get some healing from the violence and trauma these girls were experiencing and deserved to be rescued from. While there might be one or two scenes that feels like you're getting karmic justice, it is extremely short-lived. Hendrix's whole thing seems to be making unnecessary trauma for his women characters without any respite. No satisfying conclusion, no closure. Which is why I finally realized Hendrix doesn't use horror as a mirror to be held up to society in how they treat women. Instead, he creates horror at the expense of women. We are his playthings that he gets to abuse and torture through ink and paper while feeling like he is saying something meaningful about how society treats women, when he is in fact part of that very society.
Am I the villain? I don't think I'm the villain.
He is actively part of the problem. To add to the trauma, Hendrix inevitably includes religious extremism in his stories. For Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, it is easy to include this theme with the multiple plot lines that deal with the sins of women: premarital sex, pregnancy, unwed mothers, and of course, witchcraft. The final theme that I want to talk about that rears its ugly head in all of the Hendrix books I've read is none other than the token minority trope, when a character of color is essentially tossed into a predominantly white cast story whose primary role is to provide diversity or representation that is nothing more than superficial, rather than giving the character a well-developed individual personality or significant storyline. These characters are usually written as sidekicks, or minor to the story when compared to their white counterparts, whose existence only serves to signal inclusivity to readers without genuinely integrating them into the narrative. Before I go on, there are readers, reviewers, booktubers who are much better equipped at breaking down the nuances of this trope, and I highly recommend you seek them out as well. I would also be remiss in not bringing up this trope, so I will do my best to break it down and explain why this is a recurring problem with Hendrix. In every single Hendrix book that I have read, there is at least one character of color. Since he predominantly sets his stories in the South, they are usually Black. They are never the main character. We never get to know them beyond a very surface level introduction with little to no backstory, and they are only part of the story to 1. Aid the main character, who is always white; 2. Be introduced and immediately blend into the background; 3. Get unalived. Since Hendrix also primarily writes horror, in addition to doing the token minority trope, he also employs the minority character dies first trope. This was absolutely the case in the Final Girl support group and in the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. In the Final Girl support group, we are simply told about the character of color after she has been unalived by the killer who will eventually begin to hunt down the other characters, essentially being the warning for them so they can prepare themselves. The entire story of the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires focuses on the fact that the vampire was getting away with hunting humans because he was targeting specific neighborhoods. I'll let you guess which neighborhoods those were. Then there is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, and the characters of Zinnia and Hagar. I'm going to talk about Zinnia first, since she is technically part of the core group of pregnant girls. She is the definition of the token minority trope. From the fact that we don't get much of a backstory for her compared to the other girls, to the fact that Hendrix downplays her role in the witchcraft plot by having her be a non-believer. In fact, Zinnia is the only one of the girls who doesn't believe in the magic that the witches provide. I'm not saying that this isn't an interesting thing to do with this character, but I do think Hendrix could have done it better. Zinnia was essentially just there to yell at the white characters about how dumb they are for believing the witches, which... fair, I guess, but it would have been much more influential had Zinnia's culture played a role in this. Say, her having a history with or knowledge of magic, revealing that she knows more than the other girls how dangerous magic can be, solidifying her position as the only one aware in the group. Despite my displeasure at how the magic was handled in this book, having a character be suspicious of the magic isn't necessarily a bad idea, and it should have given the character something more to do. But Hendrix couldn't have that. Not for that character. Speaking of minorities and magic, another trope that Hendrix employs in Witchcraft for Wayward Girls through the character of Hagar. Hagar is a character that is part of this story simply to be a deus ex machina foil to the very obvious white witches in the woods. If this had turned out to be a situation where Hagar was the hero of the story instead of being limited by circumstance and Hendrix's need to only use her magic when the white characters needed saving, then it would have been infinitely better. The worst part is, he makes this trope worse by not even having the white characters learn or even acknowledge their racism. I'm sure the excuse will be that the story is meant to be set in the real world, but there is magic. So that is an empty excuse. Through these tropes, it is easy to see just how Hendrix views women and minorities. It's not good. Yet, he gets to continue writing books about these topics without any fear or consequences as to the effect they have on his readers. Rosemary's Baby is the only book about being pregnant I've ever read. I sure hope this isn't going to be like that. Since Fern was the one that was gifted the occult book, she takes charge in terms of the spellwork the girls decide they want to cast. Despite Zinnia's suspicions of the librarian and the witches in the woods, she is all too happy to accept being the beneficiary of the first spell the girls decide to cast.
Girls, watch out for those weirdos.
We are the weirdos, mister.
Fern, Rose, Holly, and Zinnia manage to cast a spell to transfer the crippling nausea and vomiting experienced by Zinnia to the misogynistic doctor. I won't lie, this was satisfying. Arguably the only satisfying scene in this entire book. Once the spell works, Zinnia does a 180 and refuses to have anything more to do with the magic. There is really no reason for her to feel this way, and in fact should be the biggest advocate because the magic literally helped her. It could be said that once she saw what the magic could do, it scared her. This would have been justified. That is not what is stated in the story. Instead, it comes off as the character being ungrateful, doesn't give any real justification as to why. Zinnia instead takes the stand that the other girls need to just return the book, shut up, and complete their time at Wellwood Home, give up their baby, and just forget that this ever happened. No. You need to give me a reason. Otherwise, what is the point of this character only there to make this book more inclusive when it's as diverse as a vanilla bean ice cream? The focus shifts to finding a way to save Holly from her rapist and father of her child, who also is the pastor of her church. This is clearly a little bit that was added to the story as a way to just keep pushing the idea of that's how it was back then. Okay, yeah, but this is a horror story. You could have done this a different way. One where the young rape victim wasn't the one experiencing the horror.
This is no dream. This is really happening.
Before anything can be done to save Holly and her child, Rose is sent to the hospital to have her baby. She is gone far longer than the previous girls. At first, it is thought it's because she is planning on keeping her baby. Instead, Rose returns to Wellwood Home without her baby, dead set to enact revenge on the person who took her baby from her, Miss Wellwood. The girls go back to Miss Parcay and the witches once more for Rose to get a special spell that will essentially send all the pain that Rose felt into Miss Wellwood. This isn't just regular pain. This means the pregnancy pain, the birth pain, and the loss of her child. What happens to Miss Wellwood is gruesome. Yes, one could argue that she deserved it for what she has done to all of these girls that have sought a safe space at Wellwood House and instead had it turn into their nightmare. But because of how Hendrix framed everything else, it just plays out as yet another woman being violently attacked. It ends up being Hagar that steps in and saves Miss Wellwood. Now that the girls, namely Fern, have read the occult book and done spell work, Miss Parcay wants Fern to become the newest member of her coven. Not just a member though, she wants her to embody the souls of generations of a family of witches. This could have been explained a little better. It is implied by Fern's reaction to this that she believes she will lose herself if she agrees to join this coven. That doesn't fully seem to be the case. To me, it reads more like she will simply have the power and knowledge of those who came before her in that witch line. Kind of like what happens to Aang in Avatar: The Last Airbender.
All the past avatars, all their experience and wisdom is available to you.
Since she thinks she will lose herself, she rejects the offer. So now we have the witches angry with the girls. This is when Hagar steps in again to try and save the young white girls with her own folk magic, which works for a time until she is forced to stop by Miss Wellwood. Because you're witches? Fern asked. Because we're women, Periwinkle said. Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Jew. The one thing they all have in common is that they hate us. Why? did Hendrix do this? There was enough horror with the real-world trauma of teen pregnancy, abuse, and SA, all suffered by women. It almost feels like Hendrix wanted to bastardize the witches by making them evil. Not just evil, another evil that the young women would have to face because of all they represent: temptation, freedom, and worst of all, unbridled feminism.
Let's go, girls.
I had no issue with the witches being evil, but having them be evil towards the girls who were already suffering? What is the point if not to punish women? And that is the harsh truth of what simmers beneath the surface of Hendrix's books. He uses women characters to attack other women. He uses our stories against us. He punishes us by trying to take away anything that would or should help us in his stories and calls it horror.
Are you frightened?
Why are men so obsessed with writing from the point of view of women? And why is it done more often than not without adequate research to understand the different perspective? This should be the bare minimum if you, as an author, are of a different culture, class, or gender. You should be willing to ensure that you portray your characters fairly, realistically, and hopefully without offensive stereotypes. This is largely the viewpoint of the feminist criticism theory, those who believe male authors misrepresent women characters by reinforcing harmful stereotypes. They also see men's attempt at writing from a feminist perspective as appropriative rather than sincere. While there are a lot of examples where this does happen, and I would include Hendrix in this group, feminist criticism needs to also be careful to not outright dismiss all contemporary male-authored work. Doing this might have the negative outcome of reinforcing outdated gender binaries and prevent recognition of worthwhile contributions, which do exist. Bearing that in mind, I would say viewing Hendrix's work through a feminist critique is absolutely fair based on what he has done and continues to do with his women characters. To further prove that this is a fair criticism, I suggest reading the acknowledgements page at the end of Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. I was just out of college when a family member revealed that she'd been sent to a maternity home when she was a teenager, had a baby boy, and given him up for adoption. Now, 50 years later, he'd reached out and she decided it was finally time for the family to know. A few years after, I learned that another woman in my family had been sent to a maternity home as a teenager where she'd had a baby girl. She was never able to reconnect with her daughter. That was how I first learned about the maternity homes. I grew up with these two women and loved both of them very much. For years, I tried to understand what they had been through, but I couldn't wrap my head around how scared and isolated they must have felt. I tried to imagine what it was like to have a child, but not know if they were alive or dead, sick or well, and I couldn't. So I did what I always do when I can't figure something out. I wrote a book. A childless, middle-aged man is probably the last person who should write a book in which every character is pregnant. Writing this book was my attempt to understand this hysteria and what we did to these girls. I don't think I gained that understanding, but I did gain a profound respect for the courage and resilience of the millions of girls we sent away. Despite what Hendrix's story portrays, his acknowledgements page suggests that he was attempting to approach writing Witchcraft for Wayward Girls with something akin to the Williamson's gender emotion theory, which is the theory that male authors tend to struggle with expressing emotions that are culturally coded as feminine, such as vulnerability or tender self-surrender. This can potentially lead to an identity crisis that male authors try to rectify by expressing these emotions through their writing of women characters. As you can imagine, a lot of male authors who have this experience tend to not write their women characters well.
Be your lead character.
What's wrong with Eva?
She waits around for 15 pages hoping a man will save her.
This has to do with a lack of research, lack of empathy, and writing women in a way that reflects cultural masculinity versus cultural femininity. This is where the idea of psychodynamics comes into play. To their credit, there are many contemporary male authors that manage to be convincing when they do this, because they understand that the point is to lead their women characters with empathy and compassion to showcase a different lived experience. Part of the research aspect is accepting external feminine input to capture a form of authentic womanhood. On the other hand, there are authors who might focus on their Oedipal bond, a process of re-identifying with their mothers via their women characters. These male authors tend to use women characters as a blank canvas on which to impose their desires, which can be extremely problematic. I would say this is what happened with Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, albeit more subtly than most books that are written this way. It paints its women characters with a broad brush, much like other Hendrix books I've read. Where it is most glaring is how he portrays women interacting with other women, the relationships between the women characters in his books, how poorly they are written, how much they usually despise each other and end up fighting amongst themselves versus growing and working together towards the same goal.
I am a girl's girl, and I'll protect any one of you.
This man has never encountered a girl's girl, it seems. In his universe, all women are mean girls and or pick-me's who view other women as annoyances or competitors. It is prevalent in all the books I've read by him, culminating in Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, where any camaraderie between the young girl characters feels forced, not genuine, and ultimately does nothing to help the girls out of their circumstance. The main character, Fern, flip-flops between helping the other girls to spewing the most basic internal misogyny, including victim blaming the other girls for their sins. In the end, Fern's solution to saving Holly is sacrificing her and her baby to the witches, who up to this point had been painted as a group not to be trusted and not here to actually save the girls. This isn't a situation where only society has deemed the witches as evil, while the reality is they are trying to help the young girls. No, Hendrix doubles down and has the witches for most of their page time focus on trying to attack the girls, specifically Fern. Them taking Holly and her baby is meant to be seen as a good thing in the end, contrary to what the story has pushed for a majority of its pages. Hendrix seems to want his cake and to eat it too. Men will continue to write women characters. They have the means and ability to write them with authenticity and respect, but will often choose not to due to external and internal cultural pressure, fear of backlash from other patriarchal forces, or a lack of authority that they refuse to cultivate and learn from. You're not going to stop male authors from writing women characters, but there are a few things we can do. We need to acknowledge the contemporary male authors who do manage to craft their women characters well. How we do this is by raising the bar and not allowing mediocrity to win the day. When we think a male author has managed to pull off telling a story from the perspective of the woman experience, especially a story that tackles one of the biggest horrors we are likely to face, we need to properly examine if he has indeed pulled it off. Or are we simply comparing him to the worst examples that already exist and are quietly giving him a pass? A lot of male authors have skirted by on this bare minimum effort, some even becoming a household name because of it. We also need to stop overvaluing older male authored work because this is how that bar was set so dang low. By neglecting contemporary male authors that actually put forth the work to understand and empathize with women, we are perpetuating the idea that this work isn't valuable or wanted, when it absolutely is. When it comes to literary theories surrounding male-authored women characters, it isn't perfect and shouldn't be seen as gospel. As with anything, it is shaped by perspective and can only do so much against the walls society constructed with gender roles and identity. Fighting against that isn't always easy. To fix our male-authored heroines, we must help authors write across these boundaries. But male authors have to put forth the work too. It is only when they don't that I would say you have every right to air your grievances for the upteenth time, hope that either they or their fan base changes, and then simply walk away. Every price must be paid, so why do the same people pay it over and over again? Why do the same people always bleed? After Fern has her baby, who is then taken from her, the witches up their efforts to attack Wellwood home for the single purpose of bringing Fern into their ranks. Holly is also running out of time before her baby arrives, which means the girls are running out of time to come up with a plan to get Holly and her baby away from her abuser. This is where Fern has bouts of being extremely judgmental and wish-washy with her actions. She goes from standing with Holly and Zinnia in trying to help Holly to essentially implying that she is better than them because she no longer has her sin visible, will soon return to her old life without feeling any remorse for abandoning the other girls who have also suffered, arguably more so, especially Holly. Very much giving, I went through it, why should I provide any support or help that would prevent you from going through it also? Boomer mentality. I don't want to downplay the fact that it is implied that that Fern will be returning to an abusive household once she is healed up from her postpartum, but she is written as a victim that doesn't view herself as such and never appears to learn awareness to realize that she is in fact a victim of her own situation. What is the message here? That women in similar situations shouldn't complain? That's what I'm getting from this, which is weird and gross.
Yuck! Gross!
Even if that is what is being said here, Holly's situation is vastly different from Fern's. She is a 14-year-old who has been repeatedly abused by her church pastor, a powerful man in her community, for years. She is pregnant with his child and is expected to give up her daughter to this man because he has so graciously stepped up to adopt the baby and then return to her life, where it is heavily implied that she, along with her infant daughter, will again be subjected to this sexual violence. At the last moment before Holly goes into labor, Fern finally gets her head out of her ass and comes up with a half-baked plan with Zinnia to get Holly away from Wellwood home and her abuser. They end up at Hagar's house, who ultimately ends up helping Holly give birth to her baby, not beating those token minority trope allegations. There is only a moment of relief in which you might believe that these characters will come out the other side of this safe and sound. But nope, can't have that. The girls are quickly tracked down. Hagar immediately surrenders the girls, which I do not begrudge this character for doing. She is a black woman in 1970s rural Florida, assisting 3 young girls who ran away, 2 of which are white. One giving birth to a white baby who is promised to a white pastor. I do not expect this character to sacrifice her life here, which would have absolutely been the case. The police return the girls to Wellwood home, where Holly's parents and her abuser are waiting for her and the baby. Holly's abuser immediately takes the child and just one hand on the baby's bare back, the other cupped around her bottom, and his fingers looked so hungry.
Disgusting!
This is a depiction of a grown-ass man who has a reputation for S-ing children holding an infant girl. Not just any infant girl either. His daughter, who is the product of grape. Grape caused by him. I physically recoiled when I read that. You could use the excuse that this is part of the horror of the story. I wholeheartedly disagree. This is pointed. This is violent. If there was nothing else that bothered me about this book, this would have been enough to get me to where I am and how I feel about how an author who continuously writes stuff like this in his books. Before Holly and her baby can be taken away, the witches arrive, not to save the girls. No, no, no. They have come to attack and kidnap Fern. When the witches arrive and begin throwing literal lightning from the sky, almost unaliving the girls, I remember actually shouting, "Read the room!" The situation should have been that the witches had come to help, to rescue the girls. This could have been done while keeping them evil, as far as society is concerned. Hendrix wasn't interested in doing that, and the only explanation is that he couldn't allow a society run by women be the heroes. During the attack, Holly's abuser is unalived. Good riddance. I could feel how proud Hendrix was in that moment for doing this teeny tiny act of service for his women characters. It was like it was radiating off the page. It was infuriating. This man was never suspected, accused, shamed, condemned, or vilified for what he did to Holly. A lot of men think it is enough that women get to see their attackers pay in some physical way without facing the ire of society, without facing the consequences of their actions on a daily basis. It's not. The woman's life is still destroyed. She is still considered the problem. And while, yes, her abuser is gone, she will always and forever be tainted by him, while he will never have to live with the scrutiny of society that she most likely will. I just know that Hendrix thought he'd done something with this guy's death. That wasn't enough, and further proves that he has no clue what this kind of experience is like for women. After things settle, Holly decides to take her baby and go with the witches. This is not viewed as a good thing. This is not viewed as her salvation or her happy ending. It is simply the only option she has left to live a life where she is not considered a pariah and won't be SA'd on the regular. It is implied that she will be losing herself to the powers of the witch. Nothing is free, after all, especially for women, and we usually pay with our bodies.
And in that keeping silence was the real horror.
We then get a time jump to all the women being older, finding each other in their old age where they can reminisce about the past like it was the good old days. This was such a weird way to end the book. It felt like it was meant to bring catharsis to the characters. The reader is meant to walk away feeling that too. I did not. All I felt at the end of this experience was anger, frustration, and sadness that this is the depiction of women in horror that gets propped up, that this will receive all the praise and nothing will be learned.
The plan didn't include
my daddy called me
my
a whore.
becoming pregnant at that point in time.
I think his family accepted it. My family, on the other hand, was totally,
what have you done to
totally
my son?
against us getting married.
I do think Hendrix was trying to say something with this book. I do think that beyond the things I despise, there was something there that was trying to escape and say something. But instead of feeding whatever that inkling was, Hendrix pushed it back into the shadows. After reading 3 of his books, I'm confident in saying that I think a lot of his stories are affected by a subtle internal Christian fervor that prevents him from fleshing out certain narratives to their full potential. The most obvious and all of his books are his women characters, their interactions with each other, and how society treats them within his book universe, which isn't far off from how they are treated in the real world, particularly certain parts of the US, which, if I wanted to be charitable in my understanding of his books, could be seen as a narrative point Hendrix is trying to make through the horror of womanhood. But we also see him introduce certain horror elements in ways that don't quite make sense unless he is coming at it from that religious persecution ideology. The vampire in the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, the killers in the Final Girls support group. However, the witches in Witchcraft for Wayward Girls are the most baffling amongst these horrors. They are initially written as if they will be the answer to Fern and the other girls' problem. The problem being society's expectation on unwed single mothers. They give the girls their power to fight back against the horrors that society has placed on them, to fight against the persecution for things that they should not be blamed for. It's like Hendrix realized that he would be praising witches in his story, and he couldn't have that. No. So he made them be another problem for the girls to face. The temptation and seduction of a life outside of proper society, shown in the most depressing and unappealing way. He does this instead of finding a more powerful way to comment on how society has failed these girls and women, because deep down to his core, he is part of that society that has failed women. He is a child-free, adult, white, cis, hetero male from the South, making the barrier to entry to understanding the plight of women who went through these horrific ordeals nearly impossible unless he was willing to put forth the effort with empathy and compassion. Both things I just did not see in this book. Make the witches evil if you must, but have them be on the side of the girls. He could have had all the horror elements and at least given some sort of power to the women characters instead of the imagined power he seems to think he gave to them. Returning to an abusive home, to a society that will always view you as lesser because you had a child out of wedlock, is not power. It is not a win for these characters. Making the witches be evil and a safe space for the women is a narrative that has been done before and to great effect. Slewfoot, A Tale of Bewitchery by Brom, is a prime example of exactly this type of narrative. We have a strong-willed woman, Abatha, who is ostracized and persecuted by the society in which she has to live. In the process of trying to survive these societal expectations, she befriends dark magic creatures from the forest, one of which is called Slewfoot. The book doesn't portray Slewfoot as anything but a creature with dark magic that has done some pretty horrible things, and yet he is on Abatha's side. He is there to help her. He wants to help her, and eats some of the local villagers while he's at it. It is made clear that his magic is powerful and dark, and if Abatha chooses to take on that magic, it will lead her on a different path, one that would remove all doubt of how society will view her. She sees the freedom in that choice despite knowing she will lose a part of herself to obtain it. The fact is, her society already views her negatively for no reason and has punished her for it. Sound familiar? So she takes Slewfoot up on his offer and joins him in his dark magic, raising hell against the society that abandoned her. She does horrendous things in the name of defending herself and her newfound power. She is not innocent in this, but my God, are we on her side when she goes apeshit on her village? I would say that this book is mild to low on the horror scale. Witchcraft for Wayward Girls could have far surpassed those horror elements had it employed this narrative. Instead, Hendrix must villainize all his women characters, even the witches who he initially makes us believe have come to help. Despite my dislike of how Hendrix writes women, I do think he is a decent writer and could have pulled off this narrative change. It's disappointing that he chose not to, that he continues to choose violence against women instead of letting them relish in their power to a horrifying degree. After all, hell hath no fury. Am I right?
Justice.
Yeah, putting this back on. I rated Witchcraft for Wayward Girls 1 star. While it is not my least favorite Hendrix book, it was an utter disappointment. As a witch, as a woman, this book failed me on multiple levels. At this point, I think Hendrix has let his fame get to his head, where he might think he doesn't need to grow as an author and research what he is writing. I understand he mentions doing research in his acknowledgments. It seems like it wasn't extensive and only focused on relatives, and we don't know exactly what was shared by those relatives. He even goes on to admit that even after the research he did do, he still doesn't understand, but wrote the book anyway, almost treating it like a writing exercise given to him after a therapy session. I wouldn't be surprised if the relatives only gave him a very generic story, not really wanting to relive their trauma, and he filled in the gaps with what he wanted, obviously adding the witchcraft part. Speaking of which, the amount of witchcraft in this book that has the word witchcraft in the title is embarrassingly non-existent. Hendrix relegates the witches as the secondary minor antagonist. They don't do much within the narrative. The girls themselves only perform 2 spells and maybe 1 ritual. Don't get me wrong, the spells were pretty cool and horrific, but I wanted more of that. I wanted these girls to give into the power and make their abusers pay. Instead, it ended up feeling like the abusers won, and the girls just conformed to the society that villainized them in the first place. I know I keep saying it, man, was that a disappointment. I really came into this book with an open mind. I wanted this book to be good, for it to be the one Hendrix book that would be worth all the time I have invested giving this man chance after chance. Yet again, I am Boo Boo the Fool. In my defense, Hendrix's marketing team is solid and knows how to market his books, because each and every time they make it seem like it is a book I would enjoy. They push the feminist viewpoints, how the story is about strong women, only for it to be a bait and switch. Infuriating, but I'm more mad at myself at this point for continuing to fall for it. I know I said it the last time. This time, I am well and truly done reading any of Hendrix's books. It doesn't matter how well his marketing team pushes the next one. I will not be swayed ever again. I know not everyone feels the same way as I do about Hendrix, and I'm open to hear what others think. Do you like his books? Did you like Witchcraft for Wayward Girls? Is there another book that you did enjoy of his? Feel free to let me know what you thought of this book or any of his other books in the comments below. Or, at the very least, leave an emoji that emulates something witchy to let me know you made it this far. If you enjoy my videos and would like to support my channel, the best way to do that right now is to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a little comment to let me know that you were here. It really is a big help, and I greatly appreciate it. Until our next chapter together, merry part and blessed be.